Sometimes it's just what it means to be a caregiver, that oftentimes, as you said, you're in that role and you're doing the things. You're going to the doctor's visits, you're helping with the medications, you're helping with groceries. And we think, well, this is just what we do for family. And yet it is a different role and it's a different dynamic that you start to take on. And so your role does start to shift from not being just the daughter, the son, the spouse, the partner, to that role of a caregiver. So I think that can be really hard for caregivers themselves to acknowledge, and definitely for people around them to understand what that looks like.
Hello, and welcome to Not Born Yesterday, a podcast dedicated to older adults and the challenges and joys of aging. I'm Miriam Goodman. Not Born Yesterday examines the problems and solutions of growing older today. We bring you the wisdom and voices of experts in the field of aging and offer tips on how to feel your best, use your lifetime skills and experience, and make the coming months and years as fulfilling as possible.
I'm Lynn Winter-Gross. Not Born Yesterday is brought to you by Next Village San Francisco, a local nonprofit providing older adults with support to help age in place.
This episode was recorded live at the studios of NPR's KALW Radio in San Francisco. Today on Not Born Yesterday, we're focusing on something many adults are facing: the balancing act of building a career, having a life, raising children, and also stepping in to care for aging parents or other family members. It's estimated that 63 million Americans are currently providing ongoing care to family members. Many adult children who find themselves in this role say it's rewarding, but it can also be exhausting, isolating, and even career challenging. And there's that changed relationship with a parent once the adult child is doing the caregiving.
So today we're joined by three guests. Shay English, a personal stylist at shayenglish.com. Sophia Zamudio-Haas, an assistant professor of medicine at UCSF. And both of these women are caregivers to aging parents. And our third guest is Christine Irving, the Client Services Director of Family Giver Alliance, which provides ongoing support for caregivers in 6 Bay Area counties. We'll talk about what it feels like, how they manage all their roles, and what kind of outside support they wish they had. We're glad you're here. Thank you for coming to Not Born Yesterday.
So, Fia, let's begin with you. Can you start by telling us what your caregiving situation is and who you're caring for and how this affects your day-to-day life?
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you. I really welcome this opportunity to talk about this new role. I do a lot of support with my mom and also my dad, who is my long-term stepdad. And I work in public health professionally. I'm a social scientist, a social and behavioral scientist. And so I feel a lot of connection with that. And I would love to broaden this up because over the past few years, my parents have dealt with a lot of changing health conditions. And I would say the hardest thing to work with is memory loss. I think that memory loss, dementia, Alzheimer's are some of the most kind of stigmatized and feared health conditions for older Americans or older people, really globally.
When did you realize that you were really into this caregiving role? Was it gradual or all of a sudden?
Initially, I would get so angry and frustrated. There were initial signs where I would see things that felt a little off with my mom, and I would get so mad about it. Like, what are you doing in your purse? With this kind of what I've now then learned about as searching behavior, and so I would just try and read about it. But initially, when these things would happen, I would get almost upset. So it was really important for me to learn about it. When did I first learn I was a caregiver? I guess there were a couple of kind of emergency events that brought it on. And the emergency events are really not as stigmatized and were easier to talk about, like a hospital event, an ER-related event. I think the hardest thing to talk about and navigate is the day-to-day changes in our relationship dynamics and in things that are kind of ongoing needs.
What surprised you the most about being a caregiver?
It's been a huge opportunity for me to learn and change around my own emotional responses and try and be more steady. And I think it's brought us closer, and also really centering the ways that my mom in particular still really mothers me, because I think that's like, very satisfying for both of us.
Shay, you cared for your mother who recently passed away. How did you balance the demands of work, parenting, and caregiving? And did you ever feel like you were just dropping the ball in one area or another?
Well, I have a twin sister, and we were raised by a single mom here in North Beach, and she was our pillar of strength. So when she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, it took us all by storm because she was incredibly healthy, vivacious, swimming. So how it affected me was all of our families back east, and my sister and I have each other with my husband and my 2 kids. That is our tribe. And we had to look at each other and say, we're going to stand strong and get this done for our mom. I'd like to talk about how it began, if that's okay.
Please.
She was having a lot of stomach problems, and she was trying to get into the hospital to get a CT scan, and they kept pushing it out. So one Sunday she didn't sound good. I said, Mom, we're taking you to the ER. Enough is enough. They did a CT scan. They found a tumor as big as a cantaloupe. And then the whole thing began. It was like we were living a movie. There's something, I don't know if it's the way we were raised. I stayed strong. My sister lived with my mother, so she had that caretaking role. I lived 3 blocks away with 2 adult kids coming back and forth from college and a husband. And so my role was to take care of this pod and then get up at 11:30 at night and go back there and take care of her when she finally left her bedroom to go into the living room in the hospital bed, because now we're on hospice. And that took 4 months. So this whirlwind went incredibly fast. We stayed focused. We had a plan. We had magnificent family members and friends who were family around us. We had spiritual groups from different capacities surrounding us. It was all hands on deck.
Did you feel you had to make any changes in your career goals to accommodate all this?
I did. I had to say no. And since I work for myself and I have my individual clientele, they were very understanding. So, but I would take breaks, that self-care that we all talk about. I learned what self-care is. Wow. That's something extraordinary. So my sister and I would take breaks. So take turns going to our yoga classes or swimming classes, maybe spending time with just my family, going to a movie or hikes and walks. But that's self-care was critical, and sleep was by far my favorite hobby. It was so important.
Many adults in many situations, including me, the parent will say, I don't want to be a burden on my child. Have you run into that situation with your parents where they said, I want your help, but I don't really want to be a burden. I know you've got your family and your career, and it's hard for me to ask for your help.
I hear that when I hear she's said things like that to me, and I think the only times I hear that are times where I'm not trying to balance. I really try and talk about when things are a lot or the hard parts of it with friends, with other people in my life. And if she says something like that to me, even though I shouldn't take it negatively, I often think I shouldn't let that show, because I try and really just it works best when we just keep it easy. But that question you'd had around being a caregiver, I just wanted to return to that, because I think that actually came more from my colleagues and friends at work, because I was just taking a lot of time off for doctor's appointments and other things with my parents, and they brought in that word, and it just started kind of resonated. It felt good. It felt like a nice term. But even when I was telling her that I was doing this today, couldn't really, I think she doesn't still see me as that. And I think that's okay for our dynamic, because she still does a lot to love and care for me.
So Christine, we know that caregiving often brings guilt and other feelings. So from your years of dealing with these issues with clients, Which emotions are the hardest for them to navigate?
Guilt is definitely one of them. It's a hard one for most caregivers. I think especially in the sandwich generation, that feeling of, am I doing enough for my parent? Am I doing enough for my spouse or partner? Enough for my children? Enough for my job? There often is this feeling like there's never enough that somebody can do, and having to recognize that as human beings, we have limitations. We can't do it all the time for everyone. And that's often where a caregiver's own well-being gets pushed down on the list, because it's hard to fit everything into the day. And so they often will leave themselves out last. So guilt is a really hard one to have to reframe and to recognize that we can't do everything for everyone. We can't do everything all the time. We cannot be perfect. But to acknowledge how much caregivers are doing every day, how much they give, how much they accomplish, how much support they are providing, and to recognize that some of the realities of caregiving are that there is so much outside of their control. They cannot stop the disease, the condition, the illness. They can only cope with it as best as they can. So often we feel guilt for things that we can't do anything about. And so having to recognize that often what we're feeling is sadness, is sorrow, is regret, is loss and grief. And it's not always guilt in that I am responsible and can control this and can make it better. So how do caregivers really support and acknowledge themselves? And often it's hearing it from other caregivers who can recognize, like, no, you're doing a great job and you're doing as much as you can. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I assume caregivers feel unsupported at times, and they're all doing this on their own.
Yeah, I think the other big one is grief and loss. Because we often think about grief when there's death, and we don't always recognize the grief that can come with seeing a loved one's health decline, seeing the little losses, particularly around memory loss, where it's not quite the same person that it was before. And so how do we allow ourselves the space to kind of grieve what has changed in our relationship with them, in the things that they can do, and still find ways to kind of hold on to those things that are still there. That there is the memory loss, and yet she's still my mom, and she still wants to mother me. She still might have a sense of humor or enjoy music. And at the same time, she does not remember what we did yesterday, that we maybe had a great day and she doesn't remember that. But can we still enjoy and appreciate that we had that great day? And so it's that dichotomy sometimes of holding on to what's still there and grieving and letting go of what's lost.
What do you think is the most misunderstood part of caregiving?
Sometimes it's just what it means to be a caregiver, that oftentimes, as you said, you're in that role and you're doing the things. You're going to the doctor's visits, you're helping with the medications, you're helping with groceries. And we think, well, this is just what we do for family. And yet it is a different role and it's a different dynamic that you start to take on. And so your role does start to shift from not being just the daughter, the son, the spouse, the partner, to that role of a caregiver. So I think that can be really hard for caregivers themselves to acknowledge, and definitely for people around them to understand what that looks like. And I think the other piece is what is often so taxing and trying for caregivers isn't just the physical tasks, that I need to help somebody go to an appointment or I'm helping them with their personal care. It's like, yes, that can be hard, but it's the mental and emotional aspects of caregiving that can be so difficult. Yeah. The worry about, well, what's to come? Yeah. Have we managed everything that we need to? What's this next stage going to look like? Am I doing it right? The dynamics between the caregiver and the person they're caring for. Those are all kind of those mental and emotional tasks that you can't always put down on a to-do list, but are a large part of the day-to-day life of caregiving.
Let's talk about our families and the siblings a little bit. Shay, you shared this with your sister.
Yeah.
We found that siblings have a different way of dealing with older parents. So how did you and your sisters decide who was going to do what at what time?
My sister and I are best friends. We've always connected, so everything just flowed. And we took care of different parts. So my sister took care of, the breakfast, lunch, and dinner when she was there. And then I would bring my mom things that maybe she wanted that she couldn't always have with my sister food-wise. But then I was also the holistic, trying to find other remedies, because the chemo wasn't working. So that our roles drifted there, but she respected what I was looking at. And both she and I were on board with the different ideas that I came to at the table.
Do you have any siblings?
I'm actually an only child, and I have my two biological parents, and then my now dad Chip came into my life as my stepdad when I was like 11. So it's been the majority of my life. When my mom was getting this lung cancer surgery over here at UCSF, and I think the primary part of caregiving is, of course, trying to make wanting your parents to be comfortable and well cared for and supported. And then it also breaks down that curtain that as humans, as living animals, we have, knowing we're all mortal. And there's something about illness and death that lifts that curtain, and it can just come in. For me, it really came through that day, this fear, not only for her and her well-being, but just feeling very aware of the passage of time and my own, mortality, and thinking I am an only child. I don't have kids. What if that were me? And but the reality is that you can't guarantee that for anyone. It's a special relationship to caregive, and it's wonderful to caregive for my mom and my dad.
Well, Christine, you've probably seen a lot of sibling rivalry in your professional life. And I happened to mention to some friends that we were doing a caregiver episode. And I said, is there anything anybody should know about sibling rivalry? And it was like I had opened up this huge box. This one woman told the story. She had 3 sisters. She went through, they all expected me to do everything. They told me I should rearrange my house, I should do this and that. And somebody else said, oh, I think you're telling my story. And she had the same kind of reaction. And maybe it's just because women are often seen as the most competent part of caregiving. But it was amazing to me, the sibling rivalry that went on that way. And I wonder what you've heard and what you do about it.
There's a lot of different family dynamics with siblings. And there are some, like Shay's, where you've got siblings and they're on the same page and they're working together and they're communicating and they have that great relationship. And that's wonderful to see. And it doesn't make everything easier, but it doesn't add to the challenges that already come with caregiving. But for a lot of families, those long-standing family dynamics come into play. And it varies a little bit family by family. There are cultural differences about who the expected caregiver is. And sometimes it is the daughter who's expected to really step in and provide the care. That does not always mean that the daughter has the most authority. Sometimes that is viewed as the son, or it's the oldest who might be, always thought of as the more responsible one, but the youngest might be the one who lives closest or, has been out of the house most recently, so they may step into that role. So there's all these different dynamics about how the family has worked together and what the different roles of the children have been, not just as adults, but when they were children.
It's also complicated by geography. One's living here. My mom's on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast. My brother's on the East Coast, but he doesn't want to do it. I'm on the West Coast.
Yeah, where people live, who has children or who doesn't. Sometimes it's like, well, you don't have children, so obviously you're going to step in to provide care. Sometimes there's value judgments about what somebody's job is and who can really step away from work to step into care. And the challenge is that those are not always talked about. Again, sometimes this is those sibling conflicts that happened when you were kids that kind of resurface as adults because no one really dealt with it. And it was like, well, we're fine. We can get along okay in our life until you suddenly are dealing with caregiving and serious illness and end of life. And then it is much harder to just kind of push aside those dynamics, rivalries, childhood challenges. And they all kind of rear their ugly heads in these moments where people are faced with more emotional challenges than the physical challenges of caregiving.
Sophia, let's talk about the different roles that you have and all the things that are on your plate. How do you decide what to do when and where you should be?
Wow, that's a great question there. I think that like because we've gone through periods with my mom and my dad, really both of them, of like acute need, like post-surgery recovery or something like that, then I really try and do, everything on that. But as much as possible, I try because I work in global health. I worked in Tanzania, and this was like right after my mom had had a seizure. And someone was like, is this the best time to be going to 24-hour travel away? But I really was like, I know that they want me to do this, and I want to, as much as possible, continue with my commitments and try and balance things. But it can be hard. I feel really lucky to have a lot of flexibility over my time and a lot of meaning from my work. There was this one time where my mom was recently hospitalized, and I was like working on a grant in the hospital, and I very clearly was like, am I doing this for me to kind of center and distract my mind, or am I doing this because I really, need the funding? And it was a little bit of both, but I think it was mainly the first thing. So it's hard to balance.
And Shay, you talked about self-care, so I know you've been doing that. So, but what helped you recharge when you were feeling overwhelmed?
A lot of walking. Like I said, yoga, cooking. We do a lot of cooking as a family, food prepping. My mom's like old school, so she taught us to make meals, freeze them, and then you eat them during the week. So we do a lot of that. Baking, and the guilt that they're talking about. I wouldn't want to be away too long. So I didn't get to travel with my son when he was looking at colleges. My husband did, and it's okay. It was a choice that I made. I did not want to leave her side. So the self-care came when our mom would even tell both of us as sisters, go out, go to events, go do this, I'm okay. And then other people would come visit her. So doing stuff outside together as siblings was critical to our own well-being.
Recent studies have shown that 23% of Americans are providing financial support for their parents or their partner's parents. So in addition to the emotional and physical toll, many older adult children have a financial hit as well. One person told me she was a teacher and used up all of her sick days to care for her parent, and she didn't even realize these days were subtracted from her actual work time until her pension was drastically reduced. Should there be financial compensation for caregiving? You're nodding your head.
Yeah. I mean, I feel really lucky to have, I'm able to take time off without taking a financial hit. And my parents have really good insurance. And they both they were UC professors, so they have pensions. And so like that element has been out of the picture for us. And it's amazing to not have that stress there. Because I've definitely heard of people where it really can add a layer of stress around decision-making for treatment options, care options. All of that, I am 100% behind shifting our social support system so that's not a consideration for any family. I mean, it's just huge.
Christine, you're nodding your head.
Family caregivers really carry the bulk of long-term care in this country. Our health system and our long-term care system would not survive without the work that family caregivers provide. We have the Federal Family Medical Leave Act, which provides unpaid but protected leave for caregiving. California does have paid family leave. The reimbursement rates were increased over the last year. It still is not 100%, and so it is still not feasible for every family caregiver. AARP has really been pushing what's called the Credit for Caring Act, which doesn't provide financial compensation, but does provide for Social Security credits. Because if caregivers step away from work, they're now not contributing into their own long-term retirement income. For some caregivers, going to work is a good stress relief and break, and they need that. And so then trying to bring in in-home care For some families, they might say, well, the amount of money I'm paying for in-home care is basically what my salary is, but I need that break away from it. So it is a juggle for caregivers to try and figure out, how do I do these things that might be fulfilling and nurturing for me and that I need for my sanity now, as well as my long-term financial future? And how do I provide the care that my family member is needing, given our systems and the resources that exist?
Well, I have a question for all of you. Many of our listeners may be the adult children of aging parents who don't need help yet. So what advice would you give to those adult children as a way to prepare themselves for the time when the parent does need help?
Don't have parents.
Prepare.
Yeah.
None of us are prepared for this. So what do you say to people who are just stepping into these shoes? Get your mental health in order, your physical health in order, your spiritual health in order, because you will be hands-on with your parents. And if you want to be that person, and it is a gift to be a caretaker, as she said, it is a gift. It was an honor to take care of our mother. Such an honor. I wouldn't take one day away. And then the verbiage that you have with your parents is by far the most critical. What you say to them, that positive outlook that we have as the caregiver, is everything to their well-being.
Yeah. That's so amazing. When you were saying that around language, that was just so key for me. That I had like one session with this case manager at the Dolby Brain Center, and it was so critical for me. It was so amazing, with just like all of these tips around how to reframe daily life stressors, like things like, instead of like, where's your purse? It's just like, here's your purse, let's go. And he really helped me understand. It's not like calling her and being like, when do you want to go? Let's go get manicures together. When's a good day? It's just like, hey, I'm here. Here's your coat. Here's your purse. Let's go to the nail salon. And those little small reframes were huge amount, just bringing in ease for our daily life. And then living this is huge. Like, most serious health conditions don't have easy answers. There's rarely like one treatment pathway. There's a lot of different things to understand and navigate, as she was saying, learn about. And I think a lot of what I try to do is be an advocate and a support. And we do try to bring in some organization, sometimes lose it, but like weekly planning meetings where we talk about what appointments are coming up, what are priorities, I don't know. So, but I think just the mental prep is hard.
Christine, does support groups help?
Yeah.
They do. Not everybody is a big fan of group settings, but being able to talk to other caregivers, other people who are kind of on this same journey, I think there's so much kind of wisdom and expertise that comes out of those groups. And not everything that one caregiver does is going to work for somebody else, but there are still so many tools and resources that caregivers can learn from each other. And so those can be hugely beneficial, whether people stay in them long term or for short periods of time. Similarly, caregiver workshops or conferences, there's always some of those educational programs available where caregivers get a chance to learn information, but also learn from each other.
So if you had a magic wand, what would you change about the way caregiving is supported in this country?
Many things. I think there's a lot we could do to better support caregivers. Just understanding how little Medicare covers of long-term care. Needing to have additional coverage for Medicare, whether it's other subsidized home care programs, having more employment resources for caregivers, because when you think about the age that people usually begin caregiving, it's usually when people are in the workforce, and often in their 40s and 50s, but we have clients that are in their 20s and they step into caregiving. So having that support long-term, having more conversations about caregiving, having more recognition within healthcare about the role of caregivers, and so that they recognize that person who's bringing their patient to appointments is really the one who is managing everything day to day and just turning to that caregiver to check in about how are you doing and what support do you need, and really embedding that within healthcare. And then I think it is that financial support, again, whether that's better coverage through insurance, other social programs. There's models that have state kind of funded long-term care insurance. There's coverage in other countries around universal health care that are better providing for long-term care. There's a lot of things that we could do. There are programs that will pay family caregivers to provide care. In California under Medi-Cal. So if your mom were Medi-Cal eligible, there is a program called In-Home Supportive Services that will allow you to either bring in a registry provider who's signed up through the public authority, or allow the family caregiver to get signed up as a provider. In some states, they will not allow family members, or they might allow adult children, but they won't allow spouses. So the rules really vary state by state. So there are ways that it can be done. If somebody has long-term care insurance, they tend to be less flexible in allowing family members to be paid. You can bring in an outside provider. Often it has to be through an official home care agency versus a privately hired individual. So long-term care insurance is going to be a bit more restrictive in who can come in to provide care.
Christine, do you want to give the name of your organization again in case anybody wants to contact you?
Sure. Family Caregiver Alliance. Our website is caregiver.org. Lots of educational materials, fact sheets, videos, webinars. So if you're not sure about the legal documents, there's fact sheets about types of legal documents. So yeah, lots of education that's out there. And we try and then also connect people with other organizations. So who are all the people that are doing support groups, and how do you find a caregiver support group, and all of that.
This has been an important discussion for all of us. Thank you for sharing your experiences and feelings about caregiving. There's a lot to think about. Our guests were Shay English, Sophia Zamudi Haas, and Christine Irving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Today on News You Can Use, we're sharing some new research about staying involved and giving back. It may not be a surprise, since we often tell our listeners that volunteering and involvement in community life leads to longevity. But this time, science backs us up. According to a study from Cornell University, a greater sense of purpose is associated with psychological well-being, as well as reduced inflammation, lower risk of stroke or heart disease, slower age-related cognitive decline, and all over greater longevity.
Researchers at Cornell Lab gave each participant in the study $400 and told them to use the money in ways that align with their values and interests, whether it's family, community, or themselves. Before and after the recipients spent the funds, they were measured on their emotional and mental states. Compared with a control group, they scored higher on measures of purpose, belonging, and well-being. The results relate to all ages, not just the second half of life.
Whether your purpose is helping neighbors, volunteering at a food bank or school, or producing a podcast on issues of aging, pursuing a purpose may just be as important to your health as an apple a day.
And that's our podcast for today. Our thanks to our guests for sharing their information and experiences of caregiving, Shea English, Sophia Zamudia Haas, and Christine Irving. And thanks to KALWFM Radio for hosting this event. You can learn more about Next Village San Francisco at their website, nextvillagesf.org, or call them at 415-888-2868. Our theme music is from Hook Sounds, and Jason Dahlstedt's our engineer. And we thank you for listening. We'd love to hear what you would like us to discover and discuss. Please contact us at notbornyesterdaypodcast.org. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. They're all free, and they let us know our audience better. Be well, stay strong, and remember, you weren't born yesterday. I'm Lynn Winter Gross.
And I'm Miriam Goodman.